Hello, welcome. Hope you enjoyed the last panel. It is my great pleasure to welcome Chris Bach, who's a MACH Alliance board member alongside me, and Danielle Diliberte, who is a MACH Alliance Ambassador. They are going to be talking about MACH Alliance, what else? All things MACH. So I'll turn it over to you two. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to save time for a question or two at the end here. So over to you two.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Chris Bach, and outside of being a co-founder, CSO, and CCO of the developer platform Netlify, I have the pleasure of sitting on the board of the MACH Alliance. I'm here today to talk about the virtues of MACH and how exactly its best principles are revolutionizing commerce. And to do that, I have the distinct privilege of having some fantastic help, a seasoned MACH ambassador, early adopter of the underlying movement of taking us all off software monoliths, and a CEO with a background in both service companies and the investment side, Danielle Diliberte. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Really great to be here. I'm excited to spend the next half hour talking about MACH, which I am so passionate about.
Yay, fantastic. Awesome. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Absolutely. So thank you for the introduction. I am the CEO of a kind of revolutionary new marketplace, Sensation, that has only been around for less than a year, and our marketplace actually launched just about 2 weeks ago. And prior to that, I was CTO of the St. James, which is a health and wellness brand, both under the Eldridge portfolio. So in addition to really focusing on e-commerce and technology now, I spent about 15 years in asset management and investing. We're going to dive into this a little bit as we talk because I want to share some of my past experience. But it was really about 10 years ago that I knew I wanted to pivot and focus on technology first business and solutions. So I want to share just a little bit more about Sensation, and hopefully that will give us at least one use case to continue the conversation. But Sensation is actually an e-commerce platform designed to modernize the traditional world of wine and wine experiences. And this is really relevant because over the last 18 months, our team has built a multifaceted platform and an online marketplace connecting consumers with sommeliers and independent wineries, which dates back, thousands of years to farming. So talk about monolithic. And as you can imagine, thinking about winemaking and socializing around wine and then e-commerce and APIs, it's an unusual combination, right? But I think it really sets the stage for thinking about what it is that we're trying to discuss here today. To put it into perspective, online sales in just the US in the wine industry is about 2.6 billion with about 23 million consumers. And that makes up only a fraction of the total value of the industry, not only domestically in the US, but globally. In other words, it's barely online. It is a traditional legacy industry, most of which is built around monolithic technology, which is something that we can all relate to. It's industry agnostic, but I think it just is such a great use case to think about how powerful the MACH framework can actually be.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. And before we get started, we should probably briefly cover what MACH and the MACH Alliance is. And MACH is an industry tech standard, essentially, describing modern technology with an initial focus on enabling a new generation of e-commerce. But it's broader than that as well. The prerequisites to achieve this standard is to be microservice-based, API-first, cloud-native, SaaS, and headless. To me, it's also an expression of a world embracing a new and much more efficient architecture where we move off legacy monoliths to building solutions that use best-in-class components. And the MACH Alliance next to it exists to guide enterprises and give them the confidence that they're choosing compatible, best-in-class vendors that together make up solutions that are both more performant, more scalable, but that can also be brought to market much faster than before. So I'd love to ask about your journey into MACH. So how did you end up becoming an ambassador and why? You gave us a bit of the background. I'm super curious to hear what led you here.
Yeah, I think the short of it is that I use a lot of MACH Alliance technologies as partners in the businesses that I help run is really how I got involved. But it goes back to kind of an older story. So it was really about 10 years ago when I was still focused a little bit more on the investment side of things. I was working on what I'm now really proud to say was my last monolithic transformation. I didn't really know at the time, but this is important because I was working on an asset management, accounting, and investment project. And that's one of those things I've always been really fascinated by technology before I became a technologist and an investor in it. But so I would always be the first to raise my hand for these transformations. And people thought I was crazy because anyone who's done it knows it's quite painful, right? And so we had a great team. We were working day and night, and we went to kind of one of those traditional phases of we were running our parallel UAT with the production system, kind of waiting for the right time to cut over. And it was weeks and then months. And then there was always something that had gone wrong. And when it was finally time to make the cut, we got ready, put the date in place, and then realized that we were 2 or 3 versions out of date already. So we hadn't even gone live, and the new system was already, 2 or 3 versions in the past. So that was an aha moment for me where I knew there just had to be a better way. And at the time, I didn't really know what it was. But fast forward many years later, and I'm working on more cloud-based API-driven systems and capabilities because, enterprise architecture is a really important thing for me. And the MACH Alliance came along. And I was just so impressed because it was really one of those things of, now it's the acronym, but this is really what we've been looking for. And I do believe it's the way of the future and leveraging so many of the technologies that we use today. And you compare it to some of the older or more legacy ways of doing things. And it is just the smartest way to do business and to build tech first companies. And in the day and age that we're in, you have to do it. E-commerce and digital is no longer an option. It is part of any business strategy.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And what's also super fascinating to me is just how fast the adoption is growing right now. Gartner was sharing that I think it was 2020, 12% of enterprises said they would go composable if they were building out a new digital experience platform or marketing cloud, if you will. And that number is 75% this year, which is just unheard of growth, right? I think at Forrester, more than 50% of increase into these areas around composability and MACH, right? And even at Netlify, where we are building an early enablement platform for developers to build web apps and sites that tie together these MACH components into solutions, we have more than 3 million developers and businesses by now and are adding more than 100,000 every month. And the MACH Alliance itself is just growing super rapidly as well with so many member applications. And so this is really happening at scale. It's happening now. It seems to be a moment in time where we're not just seeing gradual evolution, but a true shift. Why do you think it's happening so fast?
It's such a great question. I mean, one of the clear answers is the pandemic and people having to be in different places, I think really accelerated some things. And that's, whether it's come or gone, I think that's still up for debate, but that is definitely a piece of it. But also I think there were a lot of organizations that were ahead of the game a little bit. So I think one of the reasons that the adoption is so fast and hearing 75% is kind of music to my ears. It's a real risk to organizations to get left behind. And when you start to use some of the composable architecture that all of these companies are bringing to the table, you don't want to get left behind. And people are moving faster and faster to get into market, and you have to be able to compete with that. Competition is kind of tried and true. It was here well before MACH, but it's one of those things where getting left behind is just a real risk. So being able to adopt modern tools, being able to be agile and really kind of be tool agnostic and switch when you need to either implement a new strategy or change a business approach, leveraging those technology tools and the subject matter experts, that come along with it, I think is really just one of those things that you have to do. It's a really important part of the business strategy now in any industry that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see the same, right? Where also we collectively went from having in retail tons of different outlets, right, to just having one, and it was online. And so those projects were moved ahead to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also see that today we're just living in a world where most business problems have digital solutions, and so that rhymes really poorly with having an IT admin for legacy software and making business critical decisions that a CPO or CMO or someone else should be making, right? I feel, and I wonder if you see the same, that faster time to market is a big mover here of why. And we'll talk about reduced cost and performance and so on, because there's more than one reason of adopting this technology. Um, but it is interesting to see how faster time to market is such a mover, right? And the idea here is that because you don't have a huge monolith and you don't have all this operation, where you have all these different layers and you have infrastructure engineers, and every time you have to make a change, it's sent off to consultancy or to your admin department, and then you're in line, and maybe a few months later, if you're lucky, a change happens, right? And
Mm-hmm.
here these developers are much more empowered to go and make very quick changes, and build out things much faster. How have you seen that argument play out? Like that this is simply a way of taking your solutions much faster to market?
I mean, the beauty is we're all right here, so I'm going to play out the argument just as I do. But I think this little guy right here it tells the story for us. Just think about a couple simple life approaches, right? 15, 20 years ago, if you wanted to check the weather, you would get out the morning newspaper, go to the weather page, see what the forecast looked like, and that would be your information. Now you pull it up on your phone. It's there, and you can check it 3 times a day. You can see where the live radar is, right? Or, another example would be if you had to drive from point A to point B and you didn't know where you're going, you'd go to the travel agency, get a map it out, follow it. Now you put it in some tool and it tells you where to go. And I think as consumers, not as business leaders, you don't even think about it. It is just part of your day-to-day integration, right? And you flip that on its head. And as a business leader, you have to be thinking about what can I do to ensure that my consumers and my employees get that same experience as part of my business. And I can't think of a way outside of digital technology to be able to bring that speed in there. Obviously, you have to build it and you have to create products around it, but it's part of the user experience. It's part of the customer journey. More and more, it's becoming an expectation. And then also, the speed by which you can deliver and communicate, push out content, share products with consumers. It's just such a faster way to go. Not to mention that in a lot of areas, it's actually a lot more cost effective to do it that way, right? You can build 10 brick and mortar stores, or you can have an asset light model where it's digital with just a few key flagship stores to really get your product out there, depending on what it is. But I think those are a couple of the arguments that I always make, because it's really simple when you can simplify it, right? When we talk about these large strategies, it becomes overwhelming. So really trying to dial it down and think about different components at the same time to build into the larger strategy is key.
Yeah, and I feel like you're also touching on one of the other reasons that I often see that this architecture is adopted, which is omnichannel, right? When these large monolithic solutions came out, they had to cater a few certain use cases. And today, there's just so many that they're taking on this, and they become quite bloated and ungovernable, and unfortunately best in class in nothing, right? And so this idea of having so many more digital touch points also speaks well to saying, well, let's make sure we use components that are actually best in class in catering those different touch points, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the omnichannel approach, I like to think about it this way. If you're doing a true omnichannel strategy, you're getting 3, 4, 5 times return or bang for your buck, right? When you think you're doing an omnichannel strategy, but you really have all of these siloed components because your systems, your data, your information, your people can't talk to each other, and you're reaching different channels at different times, it's almost like you're getting 1/3 or 1/5 of that bang for your buck. And it's actually a lot harder to execute on that strategy. So really being able to create a central omni-channel approach and actually fulfill it and execute it, it requires these tools. And also, some of the, for example, MACH Alliance partners, they make it easier, right? We have experts that, do things really, really well. And so creating those partnerships, I think, is really important to help improve that speed to market as well, because you can rely on personalization. You can be doing social, web, and brick and mortar all at the same time, and you don't have to do it alone, right? You can let these tools connect and really leverage the power of the technology that we can be building together.
Absolutely. It also ties in, all these arguments for why this is happening and what are the advantages of taking on this architecture. They, of course, tie into each other very well, right? But I can't help but think of another one of cost reduction. I was just speaking to a CMO of a very large financial institution, and he was talking about his legacy monolith provider that shall remain unnamed. He was saying, they sold me everything I needed and everything I don't. Right. And it's part of the package, right? That you're getting all this functionality because it's a big monolith that you don't necessarily need. Where a modular approach, you're paying for what you're using. And I also feel like that's quite a powerful argument for embracing this technology.
It absolutely is, right? It goes back to not only can you have cost reduction, but you can also have just cost efficiencies, right? So, rather than paying a extremely expensive licensing fee for one massive system where you're only using 10% of the capabilities, you can design something that really is efficient and effective. And not only is it saving on licensing fees, but then it's also potentially saving on labor costs and marketing costs and other things that improve your operations in addition to the tech stack, quite frankly.
Yeah, and then one thing is around performance as well, right? Which is a big move. And it's when I started this in 2015 in Netlify, where we sort of pushing to forward this decoupled architecture, I really wanted to address e-commerce first, because I knew from my agency days, where I spent 15 years before this, that no one knows the value of a millisecond more than an e-commerce manager, right? But unfortunately, the ecosystem wasn't ready, and that's what we're seeing. They're more than ready now with and it's so proven out with some prominent members of the MACH Alliance. But I think this is something that cannot be said enough, right? 56% abandoned websites that take more than 3 seconds to load. 20% never return. Deloitte was just showing that 100 milliseconds show 8% decrease in conversion, right? And I think understanding, without going too technical here, but when you have the flexibility of headless composable APIs and you couple it with a front-end cloud, you can have dramatic impact on performance by replacing the web service between you and the customers and the back-end systems. And so you get the fastest way possible to get your products out there in front of your visitors' eyeballs with consistent subset and response times, right? And I love personally that I can tell whether I'm browsing a MACH site simply if it's built with best practices for the front end as well, because it really loads very, very fast, right? And the pace transitions are pretty much instantaneous, right? And so, and if you can notice that visibly, right, and you feel like catered better, at just the effect that this has on conversions rates is just amazing. I mean, what's your experience around performance, how it improved with MACH, but also what it means for your business?
Well, I think what you said is exactly right. Not only is the conversion higher and the experience better, but going back to my comment about, the risk of really getting left behind, that is a real risk from a reputational perspective, right? Because you may have the greatest product out there, but if someone comes to your website and the performance, especially if a new customer comes to your website and the performance is not at par with so many others out there, it begs the question of people saying, is this product as good as what they're selling me? Because it doesn't appear as such. And there's really no correlation there. But that's just buying behavior now, because there's so many high performing, content rich, personalized websites out there that if you're not competing in that space, it really almost doesn't matter how good your product is, because the bar is being risen. And so I think that that's a great call out. And especially for folks that are not as technical, you're not thinking about performance every day, right? You don't have 2 or 3 people sitting behind the scenes really measuring the performance and the speed of a website. And in some cases you don't need to, but I think absolutely, especially as we think out, to 2025, 2028, that will become even more important, along with security, right? I think that's another big one. Performance is important, and the integrity and the security of data as it relates to what's happening on those websites is also really important.
Yeah.
So we'd love your perspective there.
Exactly. And but also because there's more questions I want to ask you here, but there's so many good reasons here: security, scalability. Before we move on, maybe just mention the last one on employee retention, right? Which sounds a little bit funny, but I always like to bring it up because tech choices matter. Imagine if you're telling a marketeer that they have to just do legacy ads in the yellow pages, just small, like black and white, rubrics ads, right? They'd probably move on, as they would say, like, that's not something that would further my career, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for developers, right? That we all know how hard it is to retain good technical talent, and they don't want to work with legacy solutions, right? They want modern stacks. I was just speaking to Louis of the tech stack, right? That they wanted to work with more modern tools. So I do think that as odd an argument, it does make the list, right? Is that something you've seen as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, especially in the era of the unfortunate Great Resignation, people really care about the tools they can use, the path that they're on, and professional growth, which I think is important. And if you're on a legacy tech stack or are not getting your hands on the latest and greatest tools, there's that fear of getting left behind as an individual professional as well. And also there's the inefficiency of working on something that could be bigger, faster, smarter, stronger, especially when you're pairing different microservices together to build a platform that serves your individual business needs. So it's a lot harder to maintain a massive single platform where you don't even need most of it than it is to architect something that's extremely useful and efficient for your organization, and also be leveling up your team members' skills. It's funny that you mentioned that. There was a headline that I saw come through my phone today of a very large company that I won't name that is having attrition that is very, very costly. And I would imagine some of it is related to the tech stack, some of it not. But that is another thing in terms of operational effectiveness and cutting costs.
Right.
Thinking about the retention versus the attrition is a piece that some people don't put into their formula. It's a very, very important one. And also just ramping employees up or losing subject matter expertise. It's kind of a two-way street there. You want to bring your employees up to speed. You want them to stay. You want them to build out tools so that the tools can work for themselves. And then you also want that knowledge transfer internally and give people the ability to exercise their skills and really use the latest and greatest tools out there.
All right, perfect. Absolutely agree. So before we go to Q&A, two things I want to cover. This why not and why the solution's there. So this is a pretty awesome list of reasons, right? Like there's a lot of good reasons of going composable and embracing MACH, right? So many that you would sort of think, why are there still monoliths out there? Like, why haven't everyone migrated yet? But there can be a number of different reasons. So I want to dive into that, like why you see some of the companies sometimes being a little hesitant to move forward to a composable stack.
So my immediate reaction is that's a good question, but I'll give you kind of some additional thoughts there. So generally speaking, I think there's a couple different reasons why organizations are hesitant to move forward. I think a big one is perception that it's very costly, that you need a massive project team, and that you need skill sets that don't exist within the organization. And quite frankly, I think each of those scenarios are false. I think that there are a lot of ways to do this in a really cost-effective way. There's great tools out there. The MACH Alliance is a perfect example of a peer network where you can get very specific questions answered very fast by experts, ambassadors like myself, board members like you. But I also think that it's just the legacy way of thinking. 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you did a major transformation, you had to lobby for a significant amount of money, a significant amount of resource, a significant amount of time. And if it wasn't successful, an individual didn't want to be on the chopping block for that, right? Because it was point A to point B, and that was kind of the only way to do it. I think now you can be a little bit more gradular. You can work with many vendors to get MVPs or proof of concepts out there to make it a lot more digestible. Like I said, really simplify it down and start with a single project or 2 projects. Very quickly can then prove out that you can have a lean workforce. You can have even junior subject matter experts, things like that. And you really start to see that there's not a lot of reasons as to why you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, I mean, and we're jumping straight to solutions here. We want to make sure that we get time for a little Q&A. But you're absolutely right. Like, my favorite part of MACH and composable architecture is the ability of gradual migration, right? Before you would build out a monolith, build a new one, port all the content, flip the switch, and you're going to be 3 or 4 generations behind when you go live, right? Now you can slice out parts of it, the checkout workflow, only embrace the parts that are needed for that, and then have that live next to your monolith, so you don't have to migrate everything at once. I think it's such a power play to make. I also think that there's a few other things, like you want to avoid by all costs of building out an operational monolith to give you a composable stack to govern that, right? So I think making sure that you use a proper composition platform or front-end cloud can be a big deal as well in making this viable. And then I think the last thing before we go to Q&A, and I want to hear you this, often you need to go deeper to truly understand the cost of doing nothing. Very often you'll see somewhere, well, it costs us a few $1,000s a website. And you're like, well, yes, plus the $10 million base cost, plus all the extra added operations you need, plus that it's too complex and you consultancies to actually govern this for you. How do you see that?
I mean, it's one of those old age saying, time is money, right? And saying, we'll do it later, we'll get there, we'll talk about it next year, let's put it in the next budget. You're kind of, 1, just delaying the inevitable, but 2, the time that it takes, to your point, is costing a lot of money. And I think one of the big things is understanding that it is a slight upfront investment, but really on planning and making decisions and moving towards the future. That's the opportunity cost versus delaying it. So I think it's one of those things of you never want to delay it. You can make a decision of, let's just start small, but you got to get started. The delay is really, really costly.
And I know we're cutting it close here, Kelly, who's I'm going to invite back here. But there's so much good stuff to talk about. It's impossible to fit it into half an hour.
Exactly. So we'll have time for a question or 2 here. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you a question about religion and politics. All right.
Okay.
Jamstack, MACH or not?
Well, Jamstack is a fantastic enabler of MACH, right? Jamstack is what we came up with back in 2015, but it all had to do with developer workflows. So essentially we're saying, hey, like, use Headless and APIs and so on, but how do you tie them together for the front end? How do you actually build web experiences around this, right? How do you make sure that you are using the right, front-end tools and Git and utilizing the browser for runtime and those kinds of things to wrap around this to actually unlock the potential of composable and MACH architecture. So what I really love is that this goes hand in hand, because in the beginning, any tech trend starts with developer adoption only, right? And so that's the focus. And I think what MACH really was able to say is that now we're ready for enterprises. Now we're ready to next level this, right? Now we can talk about what are the best practices of an API, and what, make sure that it's cloud native and make sure that it's multi-tenant and that it's SaaS and all those things, right? And start giving those guidelines and governance, not just for the individual developer building out something, right? But for the businesses and organizations and enterprise architects and so on adopting this, right? So I truly believe that these two movements go very well hand in hand, and the Jamstack is very much an enabler of MACH. So I love it. Very
much agreed. All right. I think we are out of time. Thank you both so much for joining us. Very much appreciated. Great discussion. Loved how it was a real discussion. We should do more of these formats going forward.
Yes. We need an hour next time.
Yeah.
Well, can I just end by saying if anyone wants to hear more about building out a MACH certified solution, whether it's about the tech or vendor stack, whether it's about how to navigate around dependencies, around existing systems that you have to keep around, or whether it's around the org efficiencies that you can expect from making a change, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or chris.bach@machalliance.org. We have a large body of experts and other resources available to help. And thank you so much, Danielle, for coming here today and sharing your thoughts and experiences as a MACH ambassador. And thank you to commercetools for having us. And thank you for everyone tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo that statement. Happy to be a resource. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. We're more than happy to help and share our experiences.
All right. Thank you. Thanks again, both. If you could all exit the session and head over to Harry Rosen. They're going to be talking about their embrace of MACH, and head over. It'll be a great session. Thanks.